The air inside the boutique was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the humid summer heat outside. Pristine glass cases lined the walls, each one housing glittering jewels that seemed to hum with their own quiet power. The store's clientele moved with deliberate grace, their footsteps muffled by plush carpeting. It was a sanctuary of wealth and refinement, where even whispers felt like intrusions. Jordan Adams stood before one of the displays, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the glass. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer over a silk blouse, her presence commanding yet understated. Her posture radiated confidence, a woman who belonged here as much as anyone else in this gilded space. At 28, she had already built an empire, turning legacy into a globally recognized luxury brand. But today, she wasn't here as its CEO. Today, she was simply a customer, browsing for a gift. Her gaze lingered on a diamond necklace nestled atop black velvet. Its brilliance caught the light, scattering rainbows across the case. She leaned closer, admiring the craftsmanship. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine how it might look against her skin, elegant, timeless, bold. Behind her, the faint jingle of the doorbell signaled another arrival. She didn't turn around immediately. The store was busy, and she assumed it was just another patron. But when heavy footsteps approached from behind, followed by a sharp clearing of the throat, she finally glanced over her shoulder. A man in a police uniform stood there, his hand resting casually on the holster at his hip. His badge gleamed under the overhead lights, reflecting authority or perhaps arrogance. He looked to be in his late 30s, with close-cropped blonde hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His expression was unreadable, but his body language spoke volumes, stiff, unyielding, confrontational. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clipped. "Can I see your receipt?" Jordan blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Receipt? She hadn't purchased anything yet. She turned fully to face him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Excuse me, you heard me." His tone hardened, taking on an edge of impatience. "Do you have proof that you paid for what you're holding?" She stared at him, incredulous. "I'm not holding anything," she replied evenly. "I'm browsing." He tilted his head, studying her as though sizing her up. "This isn't exactly your kind of place, is it?" he remarked, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Maybe you should stick to stores that cater to people like you." The words landed like a slap. Jordan felt her stomach tighten, a familiar knot forming in her chest. She'd heard variations of this sentiment all her life, from teachers who doubted her abilities, from colleagues who questioned her success, from strangers who couldn't reconcile her race with her achievements. But hearing it now in this setting stung more than usual. For a brief moment, she considered walking away, ignoring him, letting his ignorance speak for itself. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the weight of everything she'd worked for, the years of sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the battles fought both in boardrooms and within herself. Or maybe it was the ghost of her Aunt Ella whispering in her ear, urging her to stand tall. Instead of leaving, Jordan reached into her purse. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. She pulled out a sleek black card, the kind reserved for the ultra-wealthy, and placed it on the counter beside her. Then she pressed her thumb to the fingerprint scanner embedded in the display case. The sales associate, who had been watching nervously from a distance, hurried over. "Ms. Adams," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with relief. "Let me assist you." Ryan Mitchell watched in stunned silence as the transaction processed. The screen lit up, confirming the purchase. The sales associate handed Jordan the necklace, carefully wrapped in tissue paper and placed in a velvet box. Only then did he address Ryan, his tone apologetic but firm. "Officer, I assure you, Ms. Adams is one of our most valued clients. In fact," he hesitated, glancing at Jordan for permission. When she nodded, he continued, "She owns this store." Ryan's jaw tightened. His cheeks flushed. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. The room seemed to shrink around him, the opulence of the space suddenly suffocating. Jordan slid the velvet box into her bag and turned to leave. As she passed Ryan, she paused briefly, meeting his gaze. Her voice was calm but laced with steel. "Tell me, Officer Mitchell," she said, her tone deceptively conversational. "Did you see a criminal when you looked at me? Or did you see a reflection of your own fears?" And with that, she walked out, leaving him standing there, frozen. Back at his patrol car, Ryan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced, replaying the encounter over and over again. How could he have been so wrong? So blind? He thought about the stories his father used to tell tales of keeping neighborhoods safe, of maintaining order. Back then, it had all seemed so simple. Black and white. Good guys versus bad guys. But now, sitting in the driver's seat with sweat trickling down his temple, Ryan realized how naive he'd been. His thoughts drifted to Maya, his 10-year-old daughter. She idolized successful women, especially those who looked like Jordan Adams. Just last week, she'd shown him a YouTube video of Jordan speaking at a conference. "Isn't she amazing, Daddy?" Maya had asked, her eyes wide with admiration. Ryan had nodded absently, too distracted to pay attention. Now, guilt gnawed at him. What would Maya think if she knew what he'd done today? Would she still see him as her hero? Or would she look at him the way Jordan had, with disappointment, pity, disdain? In the back seat of her chauffeur-driven car, Jordan stared out the window without really seeing. The city blurred past, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. Despite her outward composure, her hands trembled slightly as they rested in her lap. She thought about Ella. About the night she'd learned of her aunt's death, shot by police for merely existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. That tragedy had shaped every decision Jordan made, driving her to build a legacy that no one could take away. And yet, moments like this reminded her that no amount of success could shield her from prejudice. As the car pulled up to her penthouse apartment, Jordan took a deep breath. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fight back. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, vulnerability. She removed the cracked globe pendant from around her neck and held it in her palm, tracing its jagged edges. It was more than just jewelry. It was a reminder of the fractures in society and her determination to mend them. The morning after the encounter at the jewelry store, Ryan woke up to a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of shame. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor as if it might offer some kind of absolution. It didn't. His phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. Texts from colleagues, missed calls from his captain, notifications about news articles dissecting his actions. The media had already labeled him the face of systemic racism, and social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForJordan and #EndRacism. His name was everywhere, dragged through the mud by strangers who knew nothing about him beyond that one fateful moment. But it wasn't the public scrutiny that weighed heaviest on Ryan. It was the memory of Maya's innocent admiration for Jordan Adams. Last night, when he'd finally mustered the courage to check the news, he found a clip of Jordan speaking at a conference. Maya had been watching it earlier in the week, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she described Jordan's achievements to him. Now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw his daughter's hopeful face juxtaposed with Jordan's piercing gaze. To distract himself, Ryan drove to a bar frequented by off-duty cops, a dingy place tucked away in Queens where nobody cared what you said or did as long as you kept buying rounds. The walls were lined with framed photographs of officers celebrated during the Jim Crow era, men in uniform posing proudly beside signs reading "Whites Only." Ryan hated those pictures but couldn't look away. They reminded him of his father, a man who believed order meant control even if it came at the expense of fairness. As he nursed a whiskey sour, his friend Pete slid onto the stool next to him. Pete was older, grizzier, and less diplomatic than most people Ryan knew. He took one look at Ryan's haggard expression and chuckled darkly. "You're not mad at her," Pete said without preamble, gesturing toward the TV above the bar. A news segment showed footage of Jordan leaving the jewelry store, her head held high despite the chaos around her. "You're scared of what she represents." Ryan frowned, setting down his glass. "What's that supposed to mean?" Pete leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She's proof that the world doesn't work the way you thought it did. You've spent your whole life believing certain rules keep things running smoothly. And now here's this woman breaking all those rules and thriving because of it. Ryan opened his mouth to argue but stopped short. There was truth in Pete's words, uncomfortable though it was to confront. Growing up, he'd absorbed lessons passed down from his father: how to identify troublemakers, how to maintain authority, how to protect the status quo. But somewhere along the line, those lessons had hardened into biases he barely recognized anymore. He drained the rest of his drink and signaled the bartender for another. "It's not just about her," he muttered. "It's about everything." Pete raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe it's time you figured out what everything really means." Later that same day, Jordan retreated to her penthouse office, a sunlit sanctuary perched high above Manhattan. From her desk, she could see the city sprawl endlessly in every direction, a testament to human ambition and resilience. Yet today, the view offered little comfort. Her laptop screen displayed dozens of emails from reporters, fans, and critics alike. Some praised her poise under pressure, others accused her of orchestrating the incident for publicity. She ignored them all, instead pulling up a private folder containing old photographs of her aunt Ella Adams. Ella had been more than just family, she was a beacon of hope for their community. In the late 1960s, Ella organized protests against discriminatory housing policies and advocated for equal access to education. Her activism made her a target. One night in 1968, while driving home from a rally, she took a wrong turn and ended up in a predominantly white neighborhood. When police stopped her, they claimed she resisted arrest. Moments later, shots rang out and Ella lay dead on the pavement. No one was ever convicted for her murder. Jordan traced the edges of a faded photograph with trembling fingers. Even as a child, she'd felt the weight of Ella's legacy pressing down on her. Her parents often told her stories about Ella's courage, instilling in her a sense of responsibility to carry the torch. But carrying the torch also meant carrying the pain, the sleepless nights, the recurring nightmares, the fear that history might repeat itself. That night, as rain drummed steadily against her windows, Jordan dreamed of Ella again. In the dream, she stood in a field of broken glass, shards crunching beneath her feet. Ella appeared before her, dressed in the same floral dress she wore in the last known photo taken of her alive. She smiled sadly, reaching out to touch Jordan's cheek. "They'll never let you forget me," Ella whispered. "But don't let my story define yours." Jordan woke with a start, tears streaming down her face. She glanced at the cracked globe pendant hanging around her neck and realized something. Ella's death hadn't just shaped her fight against injustice, it had fueled her determination to create beauty from brokenness. While Jordan wrestled with her past, Ryan found himself thinking about his own father. Walter Mitchell had been a decorated officer in the NYPD, revered by some and reviled by others. He taught Ryan everything he knew about policing, including how to navigate the gray areas where rules bent but rarely broke. One lesson stood out vividly: the time Ryan saved a young black boy during a drive-by shooting. The boy, no older than 6, had wandered into the crossfire while chasing a stray ball. Without hesitation, Ryan sprinted into the street, scooping the child into his arms and diving behind a parked car just as bullets ricocheted off the asphalt. When the dust settled, paramedics arrived to treat the boy's minor injuries. Reporters swarmed the scene, eager to capture the heroic tale. But when Ryan returned to the precinct, his colleagues greeted him with stony silence. Over drinks later that night, one of them warned him never to speak publicly about the incident. "You don't want to make waves," the man had said cryptically. "Some things are better left unsaid." Ryan obeyed, burying the memory deep inside himself. For years, he convinced himself it was the right decision to protect the fragile camaraderie among his peers. But now, sitting alone in his apartment with Maya asleep down the hall, he wondered if staying silent had cost him more than he realized. Meanwhile, Maya lay awake in her bed, clutching a notebook filled with sketches inspired by Jordan's designs. Earlier that evening, she'd watched a documentary about Ella Adams and decided to write a school essay titled "Why I Admire Jordan Adams." As she scribbled furiously in pencil, she imagined growing up to be just like her idol, fearless, compassionate, unstoppable. Unbeknownst to either of them, Ryan's guilt and Maya's admiration would soon collide in ways neither could predict. By the end of the day, both Jordan and Ryan received messages that hinted at larger forces at play. Jordan's assistant forwarded an anonymous email threatening legal action unless she dropped her plans to expand Legacy's scholarship program. Meanwhile, Ryan discovered a voicemail from an unknown number warning him to stay in his lane or face consequences. Neither dismissed these warnings lightly. Both understood instinctively that their paths were intertwined, not just through the events of the previous day, but through the shared struggle to confront the shadows of the past. As Jordan stared out her window at the glittering skyline, she whispered softly to herself, "The cracks only make us stronger." And somewhere across town, Ryan echoed her sentiment, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. Maybe it's time to break the mold. By mid-morning, the incident at the jewelry store had exploded into a national conversation. Social media timelines were flooded with reactions ranging from outrage to admiration. Hashtags like #JusticeForJordan trended alongside memes mocking Ryan's stunned expression when Jordan revealed her black card. News outlets dissected every detail of the confrontation, framing it as yet another example of systemic racism in action. For Jordan, the attention was both familiar and exhausting. As a prominent figure in luxury retail, she was no stranger to public scrutiny. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about her, it was about Ella, about every black person who'd ever been doubted or dismissed because of their skin color. She couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened, nor could she retreat into silence. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the marble countertop of her kitchen island. Texts poured in from friends, business associates, and even strangers expressing solidarity or, in some cases, skepticism. One message stood out among the rest. An email from Marcus Lane, a journalist known for his investigative pieces on social justice issues. He introduced himself briefly before asking if he could interview her about the encounter. Jordan hesitated. Dealing with reporters often meant walking a tightrope between transparency and self-preservation. Yet something about Marcus's tone intrigued her. His words carried none of the sensationalism she'd come to expect from the media. Instead, they resonated with genuine curiosity and perhaps a shared understanding of the stakes involved. She replied cautiously, agreeing to meet him later that week. For now, though, she needed space to process everything. Across town, Liam Carter sat in his office at Manhattan General Hospital, scrolling through news articles about Jordan. His chest tightened as he read quotes from her supporters praising her grace under pressure. He admired her strength, but he couldn't shake the unease creeping into his thoughts. What would people say if they found out they were dating? Would his colleagues judge him? Would patients question his professionalism? Liam cared deeply for Jordan. They'd been together for nearly 2 years, but their relationship had always existed behind closed doors. They rarely attended events together, and when asked about his personal life, Liam deflected questions with vague answers. He told himself it was to protect her privacy, but deep down, he knew it was more complicated than that. Later that evening, he called Jordan, hoping to offer comfort. When she picked up, her voice sounded weary but steady. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" "I should be asking you that," Liam replied, leaning back in his chair. "This must be insane for you." "It's a lot," Jordan admitted, "but I'll get through it. I always do." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Liam cleared his throat. "Listen, I've been thinking, maybe we should keep things low-key for a while. At least until all this blows over." Jordan stiffened, though he couldn't see it. "What exactly does low-key mean?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "It means not making our relationship public right now," Liam explained quickly. "I don't want anything to distract from your work or mine." Jordan exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the phone. "So basically, you're saying you don't want anyone to know we're together." "That's not what I'm saying," Liam protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just think." "You think my race makes you uncomfortable," Jordan interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You think being associated with me might damage your reputation." "No," Liam insisted, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. "It's not about your race, Jordan. It's about timing." "Timing," Jordan repeated flatly. "Right?" The line went quiet, save for the faint hum of static. After a moment, Jordan spoke again, her tone icy. "Let me make one thing clear, Liam. I don't need you to shield me from the world. If you can't stand beside me openly, then maybe you shouldn't stand beside me at all." Before he could respond, she ended the call. That night, Ryan wandered aimlessly through his apartment, unable to settle. Every surface seemed to reflect fragments of his guilt. The polished wood floors, the gleaming silverware, even the framed photo of Maya on his mantel. Each reflection accused him silently, forcing him to confront the truth he'd tried so hard to avoid. He thought about the black child he'd saved during the drive-by shooting years ago. How proud he'd felt in that moment, how certain he'd been that he was doing the right thing. And yet, when faced with Jordan Adams, a successful, confident black woman, he hadn't seen heroism or resilience. He'd seen a threat. Pete's words echoed in his mind, "You're scared of what she represents." Was that really it? Had he projected his own insecurities onto Jordan, using her race as a shield for his discomfort? The idea sickened him. Desperate for distraction, Ryan turned on the TV. A documentary about civil rights activists played on PBS, featuring archival footage of protests and speeches. One segment focused on Ella Adams, showing grainy images of her organizing rallies and speaking passionately about equality. Ryan watched intently, captivated by her charisma and determination. When the screen cut to an interview with Jordan, his stomach churned. She spoke eloquently about carrying forward her aunt's legacy, emphasizing the importance of economic empowerment in dismantling systemic racism. Her words struck a chord within him, stirring emotions he didn't fully understand. As the program ended, Ryan grabbed his laptop and began researching Jordan's background. He discovered her scholarship initiative, which provided financial aid to children of underprivileged families, including those of police officers. Among the recipients was a young girl named Sophia Morales, whose father served in the same precinct as Ryan. According to testimonials, the scholarship had enabled Sophia to attend a prestigious private school, giving her opportunities her parents could never have afforded otherwise. Ryan stared at the screen, overwhelmed by a mix of shame and awe. Here was a woman he judged so harshly, yet she was actively working to uplift communities like his own. It made him question everything he thought he knew, not just about Jordan but about himself. The next morning, Ryan found Maya sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling furiously in her notebook. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with excitement. "Dad, guess what? My teacher loved my essay about Jordan Adams." Ryan forced a smile, though his heart clenched painfully. "That's great, sweetheart. What did you write about?" Maya launched into an animated explanation, describing how Jordan inspired her with her courage and creativity. "Did you know she started her company when she was only 22? Maya gushed. "And she gives scholarships to kids like Sophia. Isn't that amazing?" Ryan nodded mutely, guilt gnawing at him anew. He glanced at the drawing Maya had taped to the refrigerator. A colorful depiction of Jordan wearing the cracked globe pendant, surrounded by smiling children. Beneath it, Maya had written in bold letters, "Heroes come in all colors." For the first time in days, Ryan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Maya's innocence could guide him toward redemption. Maybe she could help him see the world and himself through clearer eyes. Later that afternoon, Ryan visited a local art gallery hosting an exhibit titled Fractured Reflections. Drawn by curiosity, he wandered through rooms filled with sculptures and paintings, exploring themes of identity and resilience. One piece caught his eye immediately: a shattered mirror suspended midair, its jagged edges catching the light in mesmerizing patterns. Beneath it hung a plaque reading, "Even broken things can reflect beauty." Ryan lingered there for several minutes, transfixed. The artwork reminded him of Jordan's pendant, the cracked globe symbolizing societal fractures caused by prejudice. As he studied it, he realized something profound. Just as the mirror refracted light despite its imperfections, people like Jordan radiated brilliance despite the obstacles placed in their path. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't it?" He turned to find an elderly woman standing nearby, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. "It is," he admitted, "but also painful." She smiled knowingly. "Sometimes pain is necessary to create something extraordinary. Without cracks, There's no room for growth. Her words stayed with him long after he left the gallery, planting seeds of change in his heart. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as Jordan Adams stepped onto the stage at the TEDx Manhattan event. Dressed in a sleek black blazer paired with an ivory blouse, she exuded confidence tempered by grace. Around her neck hung the now iconic cracked globe pendant, a deliberate choice meant to symbolize resilience and transformation. As she adjusted the microphone stand, the audience fell silent, their attention fixed on her every move. A spotlight illuminated her face, casting sharp shadows that mirrored the fractures in the pendant itself. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle before speaking. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I want to start by asking you all a question. What does success look like to you?" She paused, scanning the crowd. Some nodded thoughtfully. Others exchanged glances, unsure where this was heading. "For many of us," she continued, "success is defined by external markers, wealth, titles, recognition. But for people like me, for Black women who navigate spaces not built for them, success often means something deeper. It means proving our worth in a world that constantly questions it." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. She went on to recount her journey, weaving personal anecdotes with broader reflections on race and economics. When she described the encounter at the jewelry store, the room grew eerily quiet. "I wasn't just fighting for myself that day," she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. "I was fighting for my Aunt Ella, whose life was cut short because of her skin color. I was fighting for every child told they don't belong. And yes, I was fighting for Officer Mitchell, for his chance to confront his own biases and grow beyond them." The camera flashes from photographers punctuated her speech, creating bursts of light that seemed to pierce through the darkness of prejudice. Each flash illuminated not only Jordan but also the faces of the audience members, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and power. When she concluded with the rallying cry, "We must break the labels society imposes on us, not to prove our worth but to redefine what it means to be human," the auditorium erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears, others clapping so hard their palms turned red. Backstage afterward, Marcus Lane approached her, his notebook in hand. "That was incredible," he said earnestly. "You've given us all a lot to think about." Jordan smiled faintly, though exhaustion lingered in her eyes. "Thank you. But the work doesn't end here. Words are powerful, but action is what truly changes lives." While Jordan delivered her TED Talk, Ryan spent the afternoon digging deeper into her scholarship program. He visited a community center in Queens where Legacy hosted workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs. The room buzzed with energy as teenagers pitched business ideas to mentors, their enthusiasm infectious. One participant, Sophia Morales, stood out. At 15, she already ran a small catering service specializing in traditional Puerto Rican dishes. Her pitch earned enthusiastic applause, and when Ryan approached her afterward, she greeted him with a bright smile. "You're Sophia, right?" he asked, crouching to meet her eye level. "Your presentation was amazing." "Thanks," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Legacy helped me get started. They gave me funding and connected me with chefs who taught me everything I know." Ryan listened intently as she spoke about how the scholarship had changed her family's trajectory. Her father, a patrol officer struggling to make ends meet, no longer worked double shifts. For the first time, they could afford luxuries like vacations and college savings accounts. As he left the center, Ryan felt a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride because someone like Jordan existed, someone using her wealth and influence to uplift others. Shame because he'd been blind to her generosity, dismissing her based solely on preconceived notions. That night, unable to sleep, Ryan pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas. If Jordan could transform lives through education and opportunity, perhaps he could too, in his own way. Meanwhile, Liam wrestled with guilt over his earlier conversation with Jordan. After hanging up on her, he replayed their exchange endlessly in his mind, cringing at his cowardice. He knew he'd hurt her, possibly irreparably, but part of him still clung to the belief that staying silent was safer for both of them. His colleagues noticed his distraction during rounds, commenting on how distracted he seemed. "Everything okay, Doc?" one nurse asked gently. "You've been zoning out all day." "I'm fine," Liam muttered. though his voice lacked conviction. Truthfully, he wasn't sure he'd ever felt worse. Later that evening, he drove to Jordan's penthouse, hoping to apologize. When she answered the door, her expression was guarded but not hostile. "What do you want, Liam?" she asked bluntly. "To say I'm sorry," he admitted, stepping inside. "I handled things badly yesterday. I let fear dictate my actions instead of standing beside you like I should have." Jordan crossed her arms, studying him carefully. "Fear of what, exactly?" "Of judgment," he confessed. "Of being seen as less credible because of my relationship with you. But I realize now that's not your problem, it's mine." There was a long pause. Finally, Jordan sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I appreciate the apology, Liam, but words aren't enough. Actions matter more." He nodded, understanding the implicit challenge in her statement. "Then let me prove it. Publicly support you. Attend events with you. Whatever it takes." Jordan studied him for another moment before nodding slowly. "Okay, but remember, you're not doing this for me. You're doing it for yourself." That evening, as Jordan prepared for bed, she removed the cracked globe pendant and held it up to the light. The fractured surface refracted beams across her bedroom walls, painting abstract patterns that shifted and danced with every movement. She thought about the day's events, the standing ovation at the TED Talk, Sophia's gratitude, even Liam's tentative steps toward redemption. Each represented a crack in the societal barriers she fought so hard to dismantle. Individually, they might seem insignificant. Together, they formed a mosaic of hope. Across town, Ryan sat alone in his apartment, staring at a blank page in his notebook. Beside him lay a photograph of Maya wearing a replica of Jordan's pendant, bought from Legacy's affordable line. Inspired by its symbolism, he wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. "Change begins when we stop hiding behind fear." The adrenaline from the TED Talk had worn off by the time Jordan returned home late that night. Exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket, pulling at her limbs and clouding her thoughts. She slipped out of her blazer and draped it over the back of a chair, then sank onto the couch with a sigh. Despite the standing ovation and the praise she'd received, all she wanted was silence. But silence brought its own challenges. In the quiet of her penthouse, memories crept in uninvited. Ella's laughter echoed faintly in her mind, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. A sound she'd never actually heard but imagined vividly in her nightmares. These dreams always ended the same way. Ella lying motionless on the pavement, her blood pooling beneath her as indifferent officers looked on. Tonight was no exception. As Jordan drifted into restless sleep, the familiar nightmare unfolded once more. This time, however, something was different. Instead of being a passive observer, she found herself standing beside Ella in the field of broken glass from her recurring dream. Shards crunched underfoot as Ella reached out to touch her cheek. "They'll never let you forget me," Ella whispered, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But don't let my story define yours." Jordan woke with a start, tears streaming down her face. She sat up, clutching the cracked globe pendant around her neck, and tried to steady her breathing. It wasn't just Ella's death haunting her, it was the weight of carrying forward her legacy while navigating a world determined to break her spirit. She glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Instead, she padded barefoot to her office and booted up her laptop. A new email notification blinked on the screen. It was from Marcus Lane, thanking her for granting him an interview later in the week. Attached to the message was a draft article he'd written about her scholarship program, highlighting stories of recipients like Sophia Morales. As she read through the piece, Jordan felt a flicker of pride. Her work mattered, not just to her, but to countless others whose lives she touched. Yet even this small victory couldn't fully banish the ache in her chest. She closed the laptop and stared out the window at the glittering skyline, whispering softly to herself, "Even heroes have cracks." The next morning, Ryan walked into the precinct for the first time since his suspension. Officially, he was there to retrieve personal belongings from his locker. Unofficially, he hoped to gauge how his colleagues viewed him after the media fallout. The atmosphere was tense. Some officers avoided eye contact altogether while others exchanged loaded glances behind his back. One man, a rookie named Carson, approached cautiously, offering a sympathetic nod. "Tough break, Mitchell," he muttered before hurrying away. Ryan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. He emptied his locker quickly, stuffing uniforms and notebooks into a duffel bag without ceremony. But as he turned to leave, he noticed Sofia Morales' father, Officer Diego Morales, lingering near the exit. Diego nodded respectfully, stepping aside to let Ryan pass. When their eyes met, Ryan hesitated. "Your daughter," he began awkwardly. "She's incredible. Truly talented." Diego smiled faintly, though his expression remained guarded. "Yeah, she is. And we owe a lot of that to Ms. Adams. Without her scholarship, Sofia wouldn't have had half the opportunities she does now." Ryan swallowed hard, guilt twisting in his gut. "I didn't realize. I mean, I should have known sooner." Diego shrugged, his tone softening slightly. "We all make mistakes, Mitchell. What matters is what you do next." The words lingered long after Ryan left the precinct. Driving home, he replayed Diego's advice in his mind. What matters is what you do next. For the first time in days, Ryan felt a spark of clarity. If he was going to rebuild trust, not just with the public but with himself, he needed to take action. That afternoon, he attended a community meeting hosted by activists advocating for police reform. The room was packed with residents eager to share their experiences with law enforcement. Many spoke passionately about encounters that mirrored Jordan's. Moments of humiliation, fear, and injustice. Ryan listened intently, taking notes despite the discomfort gnawing at him. When the floor opened for questions, Ryan raised his hand hesitantly. "My name's Ryan Mitchell," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I'm one of the officers you're talking about. What happened with Ms. Adams, it shouldn't have. I see that now, and I want to help change things." The room fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on him. After a beat, a woman in the front row stood and clapped slowly, her applause echoing through the space. Others joined in, tentative at first but growing louder. Ryan exhaled shakily, feeling both exposed and oddly hopeful. Later that week, Jordan attended a charity gala at a country club frequented by Manhattan's elite. The event buzzed with polite chatter and champagne flutes, the air thick with privilege. Guests mingled freely, discussing investments, vacation homes, and philanthropic endeavors, all while carefully avoiding topics like race or inequality. Jordan navigated the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries with donors and potential partners. Yet beneath her composed exterior, frustration simmered. Conversations often veered toward thinly veiled skepticism about her success. "I heard your company started with a loan from family connections," one guest remarked casually, sipping from his glass. "Must be nice to have that kind of support." Jordan forced a smile, her tone icy sweet. "Actually, I bootstrapped Legacy entirely on my own. But thank you for asking." Another man chimed in, his words dripping with condescension. "Still, it's impressive what you've accomplished, given the circumstances." Her fingers tightened around her wine glass, but she maintained her composure. "Given the circumstances?" she repeated, tilting her head. "You mean succeeding as a black woman in a predominantly white industry?" "Trust me, I'm well aware of the odds." The man flushed, stammering an apology, but Jordan had already moved on. She spotted Liam across the room, looking uncomfortable in his suit. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod. Despite their strained relationship, she appreciated his effort to stand by her publicly. As the evening wore on, Jordan reflected on the stark contrast between this world and the communities she served through her scholarship program. Here, wealth insulated people from reality. There, resilience forged paths toward opportunity. She resolved to bridge the gap somehow, to use her platform to challenge these entrenched biases. Back at the art gallery where Ryan had visited earlier, a new installation caught his attention. Titled Shadows and Light, it featured a series of mirrors arranged in a labyrinthine pattern. Each mirror bore etchings of quotes about identity and transformation, illuminated by spotlights positioned strategically to cast shadows across the walls. Ryan wandered through the maze, drawn to one quote in particular: "To confront darkness is to embrace growth." The accompanying shadow formed the shape of a tree, its branches stretching upward despite the absence of light. He lingered there for several minutes, contemplating the message. Like the tree, he realized he couldn't grow unless he acknowledged the roots of his biases, the fears and assumptions that had shaped his worldview. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. As he exited the gallery, he noticed Maya waiting outside, clutching a sketchbook filled with drawings inspired by Jordan's designs. She grinned up at him, holding up a page depicting the cracked globe pendant surrounded by rays of sunlight. "Look, Dad. I made this for school. Do you think Ms. Adams would like it?" Ryan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think she'd love it," he said sincerely. "And maybe someday, you can show it to her yourself." Maya's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You think so?" "Absolutely," Ryan replied, smiling for the first time in days. "Because sometimes the smallest gestures can make the biggest impact." The next morning, Jordan arrived at her office to find Marcus Lane waiting for her in the lobby. He stood near the reception desk, scrolling through his phone, but looked up immediately when she entered. His smile was warm yet guarded, a mix of admiration and calculation that Jordan recognized instantly. "Ms. Adams," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me again." Jordan shook his hand firmly, studying him closely. There was something about Marcus that intrigued her. His sharp intellect, his genuine curiosity about social justice, but also something unsettling. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. "I hope you don't mind meeting here instead of my apartment," she said as they settled into a private conference room overlooking the city. "I've been getting some unwanted attention lately." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "Understandable. You've become a symbol for a lot of people, not just those fighting systemic racism, but also those who feel threatened by change." His bluntness caught her off guard, but she appreciated it. "And which side are you on?" she asked pointedly. He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Let's just say I'm interested in telling the truth wherever it leads. But I'll admit I have questions about your scholarship program. Some critics claim it's more about optics than impact." Jordan raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the accusation. "Optics? That's rich coming from someone who writes exposés for clicks." Marcus held up his hands defensively. "Fair point. But if we're going to dismantle these systems, we need transparency. So tell me, what's your endgame?" Her gaze sharpened, locking onto his. "My endgame is simple. Create opportunities for people who've been systematically excluded. If that makes me look good in the process, so be it. I'm not ashamed of using privilege to fight privilege." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus smiled, a hint of respect in his eyes. "You're smarter than most give you credit for, Ms. Adams, and you're more ambitious than you let on, Mr. Lane," she countered smoothly. "Just remember, one misstep, and this story could do more harm than good." The unspoken warning hung in the air, but Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he opened his notebook and began asking detailed questions about Legacy's initiatives, clearly determined to dig deeper. Later that day, Liam found himself cornered by reporters outside Manhattan General Hospital. Word had leaked about his relationship with Jordan, and now cameras flashed relentlessly as journalists shouted questions at him. "Dr. Carter, is it true you're dating Jordan Adams? How long have you been together? Does your hospital support interracial relationships among staff?" Liam froze, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He hadn't expected this, not so soon after pledging to stand by Jordan publicly. Panic bubbled beneath his professional demeanor as he stammered out vague responses. "It's complicated," he managed finally, brushing past the crowd and retreating inside. Once safely in his office, he slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd promised Jordan he'd be there for her, yet here he was, caving under pressure once again. When she called later that evening, her tone was clipped. "I saw the footage," she said without preamble. "Care to explain?" "I tried to handle it," Liam protested weakly. "But they wouldn't stop pushing. I panicked, Jordan." "I'm sorry." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. "You know what the sad part is? I believed you when you said you wanted to change. Turns out you're just like everyone else." Before he could respond, she hung up. Meanwhile, Ryan attended another community meeting, this time focused on bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized neighborhoods. The atmosphere was tense but productive, with residents sharing stories of mistrust and officers offering tentative apologies. Afterward, Ryan approached one of the organizers, a retired teacher named Evelyn Carter, who had spoken passionately about the need for education reform within policing. "What can I do to help?" he asked earnestly. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then gestured toward a nearby table stacked with flyers. "Start small. Volunteer at youth programs. Mentor kids who might otherwise fall through the cracks." And maybe, she hesitated, her gaze softening. "Maybe share your story. Show them that even cops can change." Inspired, Ryan signed up to mentor students at a local high school, eager to prove he was serious about making amends. During his first session, he met a young black boy named Malik, whose father had been killed in a police shooting years earlier. Malik eyed Ryan warily, clearly skeptical of his intentions. "I'm not here to make excuses," Ryan told him honestly. "But I'm here to listen. If you ever want to talk or yell or argue, I'm ready." To his surprise, Malik nodded slowly. "Okay, but don't expect me to trust you right away." "That's fair," Ryan replied, smiling faintly. "Trust takes time." As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. Malik began opening up about his dreams of becoming a lawyer, and Ryan shared stories of his own mistakes and regrets. For the first time in years, Ryan felt like he was doing meaningful work, not just enforcing laws, but fostering understanding. At home, Maya continued idolizing Jordan, filling her sketchbook with designs inspired by Legacy's jewelry line. One evening, she proudly showed Ryan her latest creation, a necklace shaped like a rising sun, its rays breaking through jagged clouds. "What does it mean?" Ryan asked, genuinely curious. "It means hope," Maya explained excitedly. "Like how Ms. Adams brings light to dark places." "Can I send it to her, Dad? Maybe she'll like it." Ryan hesitated, unsure whether contacting Jordan directly was wise. But seeing Maya's hopeful expression, he relented. "Sure, sweetheart. Let's write her a letter together." They spent the evening crafting a heartfelt message, attaching the drawing and mailing it to Jordan's office. Days later, a package arrived in response, a replica of the cracked globe pendant, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Dear Maya," it read, "your art reminds me that even the smallest acts of kindness can spark big changes. Keep shining your light, it's exactly what the world needs." Maya beamed with pride, clutching the pendant tightly. "Dad, do you think I could work for her someday?" Ryan smiled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "If anyone can, it's you." Despite these moments of progress, ominous signs loomed on the horizon. Jordan received another anonymous email, this time threatening legal action unless she shut down her TED Talk campaign entirely. Meanwhile, Ryan noticed strangers lingering outside his apartment building, watching him with unsettling intensity. Both sensed that darker forces were aligning against them, but neither realized how deeply intertwined their fates would soon become. The press conference took place in a sleek auditorium at the New York Public Library, chosen for its symbolic resonance as a bastion of knowledge and free expression. Reporters packed the room, their cameras flashing like strobe lights as Jordan stepped onto the stage. Dressed in a tailored black suit paired with her signature cracked globe pendant, she radiated quiet authority. Behind her stood Marcus Lane, who had agreed to moderate the event after weeks of collaboration. His presence signaled legitimacy, though his motives remained ambiguous. On either side of them were activists and community leaders, symbols of solidarity in the face of systemic injustice. As Marcus introduced Jordan, the murmurs in the audience faded into silence. She approached the podium, her movements deliberate but unhurried. When she spoke, her voice carried both strength and sorrow. "Today," she began, "we gather not just to address an incident, but to confront a system that perpetuates inequality. What happened between Officer Mitchell and me wasn't an isolated event, it was a manifestation of biases embedded deep within our society." She recounted the encounter at the jewelry store, her tone measured but unflinching. "When Officer Mitchell accused me of theft, he didn't see a businesswoman browsing luxury items. He saw a stereotype, a narrative imposed on black individuals since long before my time. But I am more than a label. My success isn't an anomaly, it's proof that barriers can be broken. Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods of agreement from the crowd. Yet when she turned to address Ryan directly via video link as he chose not to attend in person, her tone softened. "Officer Mitchell," she said, meeting the camera lens head-on, "I don't blame you personally. I blame the system that conditioned you to see danger where there was none. And while I hold you accountable for your actions, I also believe in your capacity to grow. To change. Because transformation is possible for all of us." The room erupted into applause, though Ryan sat rigidly in his apartment, gripping the arms of his chair. Her compassion unnerved him more than any accusation ever could. For the first time, he understood the weight of what she carried, not just anger or defiance, but hope tempered by resilience. That evening, Ryan found himself standing outside Jordan's penthouse building, clutching a handwritten letter. He knew showing up unannounced was risky, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he owed her more than empty apologies. When she answered the door, her expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "Officer Mitchell," she said coolly. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to apologize," he blurted out, thrusting the envelope toward her. "In person. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve better than silence." Jordan hesitated before taking the letter. She opened it cautiously, scanning the contents. Inside, Ryan had written, "Ms. Adams, I'm sorry for seeing you as a threat instead of a human being. That day, I wasn't reacting to who you are, I was reacting to my own fears. Fear of change. Fear of losing control. Fear of being wrong. You forced me to confront those fears, and for that, I'll always be grateful even if I don't deserve it. Sincerely, Ryan Mitchell." For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Jordan exhaled softly, folding the letter and slipping it into her pocket. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Not many people would have the courage to face someone they've hurt so openly. Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. "I still have a lot to learn," he admitted. "But I want to start somewhere. If there's anything I can do to help with your scholarship program, with advocacy work, just say the word." Jordan studied him carefully, searching for sincerity. After a pause, she extended her hand. "Then start by teaching others what you've learned. Share your story. It might inspire someone else to take that first step." Ryan shook her hand firmly, gratitude swelling in his chest. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of redemption. Meanwhile, Marcus Lane worked tirelessly to uncover deeper truths about systemic racism within law enforcement. Through confidential sources, he obtained documents detailing discriminatory practices targeting wealthy minorities, not just Black individuals, but also Hispanic, Asian, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. The findings painted a damning picture of institutional bias, implicating officers far beyond Ryan Mitchell. Determined to publish his exposé, Marcus met with Jordan one last time to review the evidence. "This will blow everything wide open," he warned her. "Are you ready for the fallout?" Jordan nodded resolutely. "If exposing these injustices means protecting future generations, then yes. Let's do it." The article hit newsstands the following morning, sparking outrage across the nation. Headlined "Shattered Badges: How Law Enforcement Targets Success," it named names, cited incidents, and called for sweeping reforms. While some praised Marcus's bravery, others accused him of sensationalism. Regardless, the conversation reached fever pitch, forcing policymakers to address long-ignored issues. That weekend, Jordan hosted a charity gala to raise funds for Legacy's scholarship program. Held in a grand ballroom adorned with glittering chandeliers, the event drew Manhattan's elite alongside grassroots activists. An unusual yet powerful mix. At the climax of the evening, Jordan auctioned off a custom-designed piece of jewelry, a diamond-studded pendant shaped like shattered glass. Each fragment symbolized a barrier broken, a stereotype challenged, a dream realized. Bids soared into the six-figure range before a young Black entrepreneur won the final bid, tears streaming down her face as she accepted the piece. "To everyone here tonight," Jordan declared, raising her champagne flute, "thank you for believing in the power of change. Together, we're proving that even the strongest ceilings can be shattered." The room erupted into cheers, glasses clinking in celebration. Amid the jubilation, Ryan watched from the sidelines, moved by the unity unfolding before him. He realized then that true progress wasn't about erasing differences, it was about embracing them. Despite the night's triumph, ominous undercurrents persisted. As guests departed, Jordan noticed a man lingering near the entrance, his face obscured beneath a hoodie. His gaze locked onto hers briefly before he slipped away into the shadows. Later, she discovered an unsigned note tucked beneath her car windshield wiper. "You've made enemies, Ms. Adams. Be careful." Unease settled over her, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she tightened security measures and resolved to stay vigilant. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to face them head-on. Across town, Ryan received a similar warning via text message. "Watch your back." Though shaken, he vowed not to retreat. If anything, the threats only strengthened his resolve to fight for justice. The days following the press conference were tense for Liam. His public hesitation and subsequent betrayal had left Jordan questioning whether their relationship could survive. While he understood her anger, he couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at him. He realized too late that his fear of judgment had overshadowed his commitment to her. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, Liam showed up unannounced at Jordan's penthouse. She opened the door with a guarded expression, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What do you want, Liam?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I came to apologize," he said earnestly, stepping forward despite her reluctance to invite him in. "I know I messed up. I let my insecurities define me instead of standing beside you like I promised." Jordan sighed, leaning against the doorway. "You've apologized before, Liam. What makes this time different?" "This time, I'm willing to prove it," he replied, pulling out a printed article from his coat pocket. It was an op-ed he'd written titled, "Standing Together: Why Love Shouldn't Be Silent." In it, he openly acknowledged their relationship and condemned the societal pressures that forced couples like them into hiding. "I submitted it to every major publication," he continued. "If they reject it, I'll find another way to share it. But I won't stay quiet anymore, not about us, not about what's right." Jordan studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They sat together on the couch, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I appreciate the effort," she said after a long pause. "But actions speak louder than words, Liam. Are you ready to face the consequences? The backlash?" He nodded firmly. "Yes. Because loving you isn't something I'm ashamed of. Not anymore." Though wary, Jordan softened slightly. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. No promises. Just progress." For the first time in weeks, Liam felt a flicker of hope. Their bond might still be fractured, but perhaps with patience and effort it could heal. As tensions escalated, Ryan faced mounting pressure from former colleagues who viewed his whistleblowing as a betrayal. Anonymous threats became more frequent, ranging from menacing texts to suspicious figures tailing him on the street. Yet none of this deterred him. If anything, it solidified his resolve. One night, while reviewing documents Marcus had shared with him, Ryan uncovered evidence implicating high-ranking officials in orchestrating discriminatory practices against minority entrepreneurs. The files included emails detailing coordinated efforts to discredit successful black business owners, framing them as liabilities or fraud risks. Realizing the gravity of what he held, Ryan contacted Marcus immediately. "This is bigger than any of us," he said gravely. "If we don't act now, nothing will change." Together, they devised a plan to leak the documents anonymously to multiple outlets, ensuring maximum exposure. Ryan knew the move would make him a target, but protecting Jordan's legacy and countless others like hers was worth the risk. The leak exploded onto national headlines within hours. News anchors dissected the revelations, calling for investigations and accountability. Public outrage reached new heights, forcing lawmakers to convene emergency sessions addressing systemic racism in law enforcement. While some hailed Ryan as a hero, others vilified him as a traitor. Former friends distanced themselves, and even Maya struggled to understand why people were so angry at her father. Despite the backlash, Ryan remained steadfast, finding solace in the knowledge that he'd done the right thing, even if it cost him everything. Amid the chaos, Maya clung to her admiration for Jordan, drawing strength from the cracked globe pendant she wore daily. Inspired by her father's courage, she wrote a heartfelt letter to Jordan expressing her desire to intern at Legacy someday. "Dear Ms. Adams," she began, her handwriting neat and careful, "I know I'm just a kid, but I want to help people like you do. My dad says everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter how small. So maybe when I grow up, I can work for your company and learn how to break labels too." She sealed the letter in an envelope adorned with stickers of suns and stars, then handed it to Ryan to deliver personally. When Jordan received it later that week, she smiled softly, touched by the innocence and determination radiating from Maya's words. "She's incredible," Jordan remarked to Ryan during a brief phone call. "Remind me to save a spot for her when she's older. Legacy needs dreamers like her." Ryan chuckled, gratitude swelling in his chest. "She'll love hearing that. Thank you, Jordan, for believing in her and in me." In response to the growing momentum behind her advocacy work, Jordan launched Break the Label, an art exhibit designed to challenge stereotypes through visual storytelling. Hosted in a sprawling gallery downtown, the event featured works by minority artists exploring themes of identity, resilience, and transformation. One standout piece, a mural depicting Ella Adams surrounded by shards of broken glass, drew particular attention. Beneath it hung a plaque reading, "Even heroes have cracks. Through those cracks, light emerges." During the opening night, Jordan delivered a stirring speech, urging attendees to embrace vulnerability as a catalyst for change. "Labels are meant to confine us," she declared. "But art reminds us that we are more than our circumstances. We are creators, innovators, survivors. And together we can rewrite the narrative." The crowd erupted into applause, moved by her vision. As guests mingled beneath the glittering lights, Ryan found himself standing near the mural, lost in thought. He traced the jagged edges of the painted glass with his eyes, reflecting on how far he'd come since that fateful day at the jewelry store. When Jordan approached him moments later, her expression softened. "You've changed, Ryan. I can see it in your eyes." He nodded, humbled by her acknowledgement. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to start building a better future. For Maya, for Sophia, for everyone who deserves better. Despite the night's success, ominous signs persisted. As Jordan prepared to leave the gallery, a security guard discreetly informed her of a suspicious package found near the entrance. Though deemed harmless after inspection, the incident served as a chilling reminder of the risks she faced. Later that evening, Ryan noticed a black SUV parked outside his apartment building, its occupants watching him intently. He reported the sighting to local authorities, but their response was dismissive, citing lack of evidence. Both Jordan and Ryan understood the stakes were higher than ever. Forces opposed to their efforts wouldn't hesitate to strike again, and they needed to remain vigilant if they hoped to endure. The uneasy calm following the launch of Break the Label shattered abruptly one Tuesday morning. Jordan awoke to find her security team conducting a sweep of her penthouse after an attempted break-in overnight. The intruders had bypassed external alarms and entered through a service entrance, leaving behind no trace beyond a hastily scrawled note taped to her office door. "Stop meddling where you don't belong. Next time, we won't be so polite." Her heart raced as she processed the message, but outwardly she remained composed. She instructed her head of security to increase patrols and install additional cameras around the building. Privately, however, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of vulnerability. Whoever was targeting her wasn't just issuing idle threats, they were escalating. That same day, Ryan received a chilling phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, yet unmistakably menacing. "You think exposing corruption makes you untouchable?" it growled. "We're watching you, Mitchell. And your daughter." Ryan froze, his blood turning to ice. "Maya. They wouldn't dare harm her, or would they?" He immediately called the precinct, requesting protection for his family, only to be met with bureaucratic delays. Frustrated, he turned to Jordan, who connected him with her private security firm. Within hours, armed guards were stationed outside his apartment building. Despite these precautions, both Jordan and Ryan felt the walls closing in. Shadows seemed to lurk everywhere, in empty hallways, behind parked cars, even in the reflective surfaces of their own homes. The weight of constant surveillance wore them down, but neither dared let their guard slip. In response to the rising hostility, activists and allies rallied around Jordan and Ryan, organizing protests and vigils to denounce intimidation tactics. A coalition of grassroots organizations issued a joint statement condemning the threats, calling for unity across racial and socioeconomic lines. "We will not be silenced," read the manifesto, signed by leaders from Black Lives Matter, immigrant rights groups, and LGBTQ+ advocacy networks. Attempts to suppress voices of change only strengthen our resolve. Together, we rise. The movement gained momentum quickly, drawing thousands to a march through Manhattan streets. Protesters carried signs reading, "Break the labels" and "Justice over fear," while chanting slogans like, "No justice, no peace." At the head of the procession stood Jordan, flanked by Marcus Lane and other prominent figures. Her presence inspired courage among demonstrators, many of whom credited her resilience as a catalyst for their activism. Ryan joined the march alongside Maya, holding up a sign bearing Ella Adams' portrait. Though initially hesitant to participate publicly, he realized that staying silent would only embolden those seeking to silence others. As chants echoed around him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that collective action could overcome even the darkest forces. Later that week, Jordan attended a fundraising gala at a predominantly white country club where tensions simmered beneath the surface of polite conversation. Guests sipped champagne and nibbled hors d'oeuvres, discussing investments and vacation plans as though oblivious to the turmoil gripping the city. Yet subtle jabs underscored the evening's veneer of civility. "I hear you've been making quite the splash lately," remarked one guest, his tone dripping with condescension. "Must be exhausting, carrying the hopes of an entire race on your shoulders." Jordan smiled coolly, her eyes glinting with steel. "Funny, I didn't realize my success required permission." Another woman chimed in, feigning concern. "Still, isn't it dangerous to provoke such backlash? Surely there are safer ways to advocate for change." "Safer doesn't mean effective," Jordan countered smoothly. "And sometimes danger is necessary to dismantle systems designed to keep us silent." Her responses drew nods of approval from allies scattered throughout the room, including Liam, who stood nearby offering quiet support. Despite lingering tension between them, he remained steadfast in his commitment to stand beside her publicly, a small but meaningful gesture of solidarity. As the night wore on, Jordan reflected on the stark contrast between this insulated world and the communities she served. Here, privilege insulated people from reality. There, resilience forged paths toward opportunity. She resolved to use her platform to challenge these entrenched biases, not just through words, but through action. Back at the gallery hosting Break the Label, attendees continued flocking to view the exhibit, drawn by its raw emotional power and unflinching portrayal of systemic injustice. One installation, a towering sculpture of shattered glass suspended midair, captivated viewers with its intricate refractive patterns. Beneath it hung a plaque reading, "Even broken things can reflect beauty." Ryan visited the piece during a rare moment of solitude, finding solace in its symbolism. As sunlight streamed through the shards, casting kaleidoscopic shadows across the floor, he thought about his journey thus far. Like the sculpture, he'd been fractured by guilt and fear, but through vulnerability, he'd begun piecing himself back together. When Jordan joined him later, they shared a quiet moment of reflection. Neither needed to speak. The art spoke for itself, illuminating truths too profound for words. As the evening drew to a close, a shadowy figure lingered near the gallery's exit, observing Jordan and Ryan from afar. Dressed in nondescript clothing and wearing a hoodie pulled low over their face, they blended seamlessly into the crowd. But their gaze betrayed intent, lingering longer than casual interest warranted. When Jordan exited the building moments later, the figure slipped into the darkness, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of Manhattan. Their motives remained unclear, but their presence signaled that the battle was far from over. The aftermath of the threats forced Ryan to reevaluate his life's trajectory. He realized that while exposing corruption was crucial, true change required more than whistleblowing. It demanded education. If he could teach others to recognize and dismantle their biases, perhaps he could prevent future injustices like the one he'd committed against Jordan. With this newfound clarity, Ryan enrolled in a teaching certification program focused on social justice and equity. His decision surprised many, including himself, but it felt right. For the first time in years, he woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, eager to learn how to become a mentor rather than an enforcer. His first assignment involved shadowing a veteran educator at a community college, observing classes centered around systemic racism and implicit bias. The professor, Dr. Elena Torres, welcomed him warmly but didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead. "This work isn't easy," she warned during their initial meeting. "People don't like being told they're wrong, especially when it comes to deeply ingrained beliefs." Ryan nodded, undeterred. "I know what it's like to confront those beliefs firsthand," he admitted. "And I also know how transformative it can be once you do." Dr. Torres smiled faintly, impressed by his candor. "Then maybe you'll make a good teacher after all." Over the next few weeks, Ryan immersed himself in coursework, absorbing lessons about privilege, power dynamics, and intersectionality. He participated in role-playing exercises designed to expose hidden prejudices, often finding himself squirming under the weight of uncomfortable truths. Yet each revelation brought him closer to understanding not just Jordan's perspective, but the broader struggles faced by marginalized communities. When he finally delivered his first lecture to a small group of students, his voice trembled slightly as he introduced himself. "My name is Ryan Mitchell," he began, "and I used to be a police officer. But today, I'm here because I want to help break the cycles of bias that divide us." The room fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on him. Some students looked skeptical, while others appeared intrigued. By the end of the session, however, even the doubters had softened, moved by his honesty and vulnerability. Afterward, Maya approached him proudly, clutching her sketchbook filled with drawings inspired by Jordan's designs. "Dad," she said earnestly, "you're my hero now." Ryan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you, sweetheart. But remember, real heroes are the ones who keep fighting for what's right, even when it's hard." Meanwhile, Break the Label continued to gain traction worldwide, inspiring grassroots movements in cities across the globe. Activists adopted its themes of resilience and transformation, organizing art exhibits, workshops, and rallies aimed at challenging stereotypes. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #BreakTheLabel and #ShatterTheCeiling, amplifying voices long silenced by systemic oppression. At the heart of the campaign stood Jordan, whose tireless advocacy earned her international recognition. She traveled extensively, delivering speeches at universities, conferences, and community centers. Each appearance reinforced her mission to dismantle barriers, not just economic or racial, but societal constructs that limited human potential. One particularly impactful event took place in Johannesburg, South Africa, where Jordan addressed a crowd gathered outside the Apartheid Museum. Standing beneath a monument honoring Nelson Mandela, she spoke passionately about the interconnectedness of struggles for equality. "The chains of prejudice may look different depending on where you stand," she declared, her voice resonating through the open square, "but they weigh equally heavy on all who bear them. Our task is not merely to break these chains, but to ensure they cannot be forged again." Her words struck a chord with attendees, sparking conversations about shared histories and collective liberation. As cameras flashed and cheers erupted, Jordan felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not because of the accolades, but because of the unity her message inspired. Back home, Liam accompanied her to several events, standing steadfastly by her side despite lingering doubts about his ability to contribute meaningfully. Though their relationship remained fragile, Jordan appreciated his efforts, recognizing that growth, like forgiveness, was a process. Despite the campaign's success, the anonymous threats persisted, growing increasingly brazen. One night, Jordan returned to her penthouse to find her office ransacked, papers strewn across the floor and drawers emptied onto the carpet. Security footage revealed a masked intruder slipping past guards, leaving behind another ominous note. "You've made powerful enemies, Ms. Adams. Step back before it's too late." Fury surged within her, but she refused to yield. Instead, she contacted Marcus Lane, urging him to investigate further. Together, they uncovered evidence linking the threats to a disgruntled former employee, a man fired years earlier for embezzlement who harbored resentment toward Jordan's success. Armed with this information, Jordan and Ryan collaborated with law enforcement to apprehend the suspect, ensuring justice without resorting to violence. During the arrest, Ryan played a pivotal role, leveraging his connections within the precinct to secure cooperation from reluctant colleagues. When the dust settled, Jordan turned to Ryan with gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." He nodded, humbled by her acknowledgement. "We're stronger together, Jordan." Always. In the wake of the confrontation, Liam's resolve solidified. He co-founded a foundation with Jordan aimed at supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs, channeling his medical expertise into providing healthcare resources for underserved communities. Though initially hesitant to step into such a public role, he found strength in Jordan's unwavering determination. "We can't fix everything overnight," she reminded him during one planning session. "But every step forward matters." Their partnership, both professional and personal, began to heal, built on mutual respect and shared goals. While scars remained, they chose to focus on progress rather than perfection. As a gesture of gratitude, Jordan gifted Ryan a replica of her cracked globe pendant, its jagged edges catching the light like shards of hope. "This is for you," she said softly, placing it in his palm. A reminder that even broken things can reflect beauty and that redemption starts with courage. Ryan clasped the pendant tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. "You earned it," Jordan replied firmly. "By facing your fears and choosing to grow. That's worth more than gold." Inspired by her father's transformation, Maya penned another letter to Jordan, expressing renewed admiration and ambition. "Dear Ms. Adams," she wrote, her handwriting neat and confident, "I still want to work for legacy someday. Maybe I can help design jewelry that tells stories like your cracked globe pendant. Could I come visit your office soon? I'd love to learn more about how you break labels." Jordan smiled upon reading the letter, touched by Maya's enthusiasm. She responded promptly, inviting her to tour the company headquarters during summer break. "Legacy needs dreamers like you," she wrote warmly. "Together, we'll keep breaking barriers." As Maya tucked the reply into her backpack, she glanced at the cracked globe pendant hanging around her neck and whispered to herself, "Even heroes have cracks. Through those cracks, light emerges." By early autumn, Ryan had completed his teaching certification and secured a position at a local community college. His first official lecture marked the culmination of months of hard work, a chance to put theory into practice and inspire change in ways he'd never imagined possible. The classroom buzzed with anticipation as students filed in, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Ryan stood at the front of the room, adjusting his tie nervously before addressing them. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I'll be guiding you through this course on combating bias and discrimination." He paused, letting the weight of his introduction settle. Then, with quiet conviction, he added, "I'm here not because I have all the answers, but because I've asked myself some of the hardest questions. And I believe that together we can find solutions." Over the next hour, Ryan shared snippets of his journey, from the day he confronted Jordan Adams to the moment he realized policing wasn't his true calling. He spoke candidly about his mistakes, his fears, and his determination to make amends. The students listened intently, many nodding in agreement or scribbling notes furiously. When the session ended, one young black woman approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Mitchell," she said softly, her eyes shining with gratitude, "thank you for being honest. It means a lot to hear someone like you admit they were wrong." Ryan smiled warmly, touched by her words. "Thank you for trusting me enough to listen. That's where real change begins." As weeks turned into months, Ryan found joy in teaching, watching his students grapple with uncomfortable truths, challenge societal norms, and emerge stronger for it. Maya beamed with pride whenever she overheard classmates praising her father, often boasting, "That's my dad, he's changing the world." For Ryan, these moments validated every sacrifice he'd made along the way. Teaching wasn't just a career shift. It was redemption personified. While Ryan embraced his new role, Jordan continued navigating the complexities of her own healing process. Though outwardly composed, she carried scars from years of battling systemic oppression. wounds that no amount of success could fully erase. Yet she refused to let those scars define her. One crisp October afternoon, Jordan attended her final therapy session with Dr. Patel, a compassionate counselor who had guided her through countless sleepless nights and recurring nightmares. As they sat together in the cozy office, Jordan reflected on how far she'd come since their initial meetings. "I used to think Ella's death was something I had to carry alone," she admitted, tracing the edge of the cracked globe pendant around her neck. "Like it was my responsibility to honor her memory by never showing weakness." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. "And now I realize honoring her means embracing vulnerability," Jordan replied, her voice soft but resolute. "Ella fought for equality because she believed in humanity's capacity to grow. Carrying her torch doesn't mean shouldering guilt, it means continuing the work she started." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of finally letting go of the burden she'd carried for so long. Dr. Patel reached across the desk, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "You're ready," she said simply. "Not because you've erased your pain, but because you've learned to live alongside it." Jordan exhaled deeply, feeling lighter than she had in years. She left the session with a sense of closure, not just for Ella, but for herself. Moving forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be authentic. And that was enough. Later that evening, Jordan hosted a private dinner at her penthouse to celebrate recent milestones, the success of Break the Label, Legacy's expanded scholarship program, and the launch of Liam's healthcare initiative for underserved entrepreneurs. Guests included Marcus Lane, Dr. Elena Torres, and several activists whose collaboration had strengthened Jordan's advocacy efforts. As dessert was served, Jordan rose from her seat, holding up a glass of champagne. "To everyone here tonight," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Thank you for believing in the power of unity. Together, we've proven that even the strongest barriers can be broken." Her eyes landed on Ryan, seated near the window with Maya beside him. She smiled warmly, raising her glass in acknowledgement. "And to Ryan for having the courage to confront his fears and embrace growth. Your journey inspires us all." Ryan flushed slightly, humbled by her praise. He raised his own glass in response, mouthing a silent "thank you." After the toast, Jordan excused herself briefly, returning moments later with a small velvet box. Inside lay a custom-designed cracked globe pendant, its jagged edges adorned with tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars scattered across the night sky. "This is for you, Ryan," she said, presenting it to him amidst murmurs of admiration from the guests. A reminder that even broken things can reflect beauty and that redemption starts with courage. Ryan accepted the pendant with trembling hands, overcome with emotion. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, echoing his earlier sentiment. "You earned it," Jordan countered firmly. "By choosing to grow, to teach, to heal, that's worth more than gold." As Ryan clasped the pendant around his neck, Maya clapped excitedly, her face glowing with pride. "Dad, you look amazing," she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. The room erupted into applause, a fitting tribute to the progress each person represented. For Jordan, the gesture symbolized not just reconciliation, but hope, a belief that even fractured relationships could mend, given time and effort. Inspired by the evening's events, Maya penned another heartfelt letter to Jordan the following day, expressing her growing ambition and admiration. "Dear Ms. Adams," she wrote, her handwriting neat and confident, "seeing you and my dad working together makes me believe anything is possible. I still want to intern at Legacy someday. I promise I'll work really hard. Can I visit again soon? Maybe I can help design jewelry that tells stories like your cracked globe pendant." Jordan chuckled softly upon reading the letter, touched by Maya's enthusiasm. She responded promptly, inviting her to shadow designers during spring break. "Legacy needs dreamers like you," she wrote warmly. "Together, we'll keep breaking barriers." When Maya received the reply, she squealed with delight, clutching the letter to her chest. As she gazed at the mural of Ella Adams hanging in her bedroom, a gift from Jordan during their last visit, she whispered to herself, "Even heroes have cracks. Through those cracks, light emerges." The stage was set at a grand auditorium in Manhattan's Lincoln Center, where Jordan Adams prepared to deliver what would become one of her most defining speeches. The TEDx event had grown exponentially since her first appearance months earlier, drawing thousands of attendees eager to hear from a woman who had become synonymous with resilience and transformation. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the cavernous space. Dressed in an elegant ivory gown paired with her signature cracked globe pendant, Jordan radiated quiet authority. She paused briefly, allowing the noise to subside before addressing the crowd. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "When I last stood here, I spoke about breaking labels, the societal constructs that confine us, limit us, and too often destroy us. Tonight, I want to talk about something deeper, dignity." Her gaze swept across the sea of faces, lingering on familiar ones scattered throughout the room. Ryan and Maya seated near the front, Marcus Lane nodding encouragingly, Liam offering a subtle smile of support. Each represented a thread in the tapestry of change she'd helped weave over the past year. "My dignity existed before I was born," she continued, her tone unwavering. "It wasn't granted by wealth, success, or recognition. It was inherent. What I fight for is ensuring no child has to prove they deserve to live simply because of the color of their skin." The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of cameras capturing every word. Jordan's voice softened as she transitioned to a more personal note. "I carry my Aunt Ella's legacy not out of obligation, but out of love. Her death taught me that fear doesn't have to define us, and neither does hatred. We can choose courage instead, compassion instead." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then, with renewed intensity, she declared, "But this isn't just my story. It's our collective responsibility to dismantle systems built on prejudice, to uplift voices long silenced, to ensure that future generations inherit a world freer than the one we inherited." As she concluded, the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears, others cheering loudly. For many, Jordan's message transcended rhetoric. It was a call to action, a reminder that even the smallest acts of defiance could spark monumental change. Back at the community college, Ryan settled into his role as an instructor, finding fulfillment in mentoring students who reminded him of his younger self, eager yet uncertain, burdened by biases they didn't fully understand. His classroom became a sanctuary for difficult conversations, a space where vulnerability was met with empathy rather than judgment. One particularly impactful moment occurred during a discussion about systemic racism when a young white student hesitantly raised his hand. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "how do you forgive someone like you used to be?" The question hung heavy in the air, but Ryan welcomed it. "You don't forgive blindly," he replied honestly. "You confront the harm head-on, acknowledge your role in perpetuating it, and commit to doing better. Forgiveness comes later, if it comes at all. What matters is the effort to change." The student nodded thoughtfully, visibly moved by the response. After class, he approached Ryan to thank him, admitting that he'd never considered his own privilege until now. "I guess I've got a lot to learn," he said sheepishly. "That makes two of us," Ryan replied with a grin. "Learning never stops, not for any of us." Maya, meanwhile, thrived under her father's influence, often accompanying him to campus events and sitting in on lectures. Her sketches filled notebooks with designs inspired by social justice themes, each piece reflecting her growing understanding of equality and resilience. When Ryan noticed how much joy these projects brought her, he encouraged her to pursue art seriously, a suggestion she embraced wholeheartedly. By year's end, Ryan received glowing feedback from colleagues and students alike, cementing his reputation as a compassionate educator dedicated to fostering growth. Though scars from his past remained, he wore them proudly, as reminders of the journey that led him here. That summer, Maya eagerly reported to Legacy's headquarters for her internship, clutching a portfolio brimming with sketches and ideas. Jordan greeted her warmly, ushering her into a sleek design studio overlooking Central Park. "Welcome to the team," Jordan said with a smile, handing her a lanyard emblazoned with the Legacy logo. "Ready to break some labels?" Maya beamed, her excitement palpable. "Absolutely. I've been practicing all summer. I promise I won't let you down." Over the next few weeks, Maya immersed herself in the creative process, collaborating with designers to bring her visions to life. One standout piece, a necklace shaped like intertwined roots breaking through soil, earned praise from the entire team. "This is incredible," Jordan remarked, holding up the prototype. "It tells a story of resilience and connection. Exactly what Legacy stands for." As the internship progressed, Maya grew more confident, her contributions earning recognition beyond the studio walls. During a company-wide meeting, Jordan announced plans to feature Maya's design in Legacy's upcoming collection, describing it as a symbol of hope for the next generation. Tears welled in Maya's eyes as the room erupted into applause. She glanced at her father, seated nearby with pride shining in his eyes, and whispered softly, "We're breaking chains, Dad." Just like you always said. On the final day of her internship, Maya stood before a mural commissioned by Legacy. A sprawling depiction of Ella Adams surrounded by shards of broken glass. Beneath it hung a plaque reading, "Even heroes have cracks. Through those cracks, light emerges." Clutching her cracked globe pendant, Maya traced the jagged edges of the painted shards with her fingers, marveling at how perfectly they mirrored her journey thus far. From her father's redemption to Jordan's unwavering advocacy, she saw proof that even fractured worlds could heal if given enough time, effort, and love. As sunlight streamed through the windows, casting kaleidoscopic shadows across the floor, Maya turned to Jordan with a hopeful smile. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything." Jordan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. "No, thank you for reminding us all that the future is brighter when we build it together." With that, the two shared a quiet moment of reflection, united by a shared vision of progress. One that bridged generations, shattered stereotypes, and illuminated paths toward equality.